Under the burning sun of the Arizona frontier in 1869, the wind swept across Red Valley carrying whispers of fear and fate. 800 blue-coated soldiers marched through the dust, their faces shadowed by exhaustion and doubt. They had been sent to break a small Apache band that refused to bow to Washington's rule. For weeks, the soldiers had hunted them across canyons and deserts, never realizing that the chase would end not in triumph but in surrender. Among the troops rode Captain Elias Monroe, a man torn between duty and conscience. He had fought wars before, seen men die on both sides, and learned that victory often left deeper scars than defeat. His orders were clear: surround the Apaches, force them to yield, and bring peace to the valley. But as Red Valley opened before him, a vast basin of crimson earth and ghostly silence, something in his heart hesitated. He felt as though the land itself was warning him. The Apache camp lay across the ridge, no more than 200 warriors, their families gathered behind them. They had chosen Red Valley not for defense but for meaning. It was sacred ground, a place where their ancestors had prayed for rain and courage. The soldiers saw enemies, the Apaches saw home. Monroe knew this, though few of his men cared to understand. They were tired, angry, and hungry for the glory of conquest. Yet as the sun fell behind the cliffs, even the most hardened among them felt unease in the still air. That night, the campfires burned low. Stories drifted through the ranks, of ghosts who rode with the Apaches, of soldiers who vanished into the desert mist. The chaplain prayed, the sergeant counted bullets, and Monroe sat alone, staring at the valley. He thought of his wife in Virginia, of the promises he had made to return with honor. But what was honor if it demanded blood from those who only defended their right to live? The question twisted in him like a blade. At dawn, the silence broke. A horn echoed across the valley, followed by a war cry that shook the earth. The Apache riders descended from the ridge like shadows born of fire, moving fast and precise. But they didn't attack to kill, they aimed to warn. Their arrows struck the ground before the soldiers, thudding like heartbeats. The soldiers, startled, raised their rifles, waiting for the order to fire. Monroe lifted his hand to halt them, his chest pounding. Across the plain, a single figure appeared on horseback, a tall, weathered man wrapped in a crimson blanket. It was Naiche, son of the legendary chief Cochise. His presence radiated calm strength. He rode forward alone, unarmed, stopping within shouting distance. Monroe could see the sorrow etched in the Apache's eyes. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Naiche raised his hand in peace and called out words that none but the interpreter could understand. But Monroe didn't need translation. He understood the tone, the voice of a man pleading not for victory but for dignity. The standoff stretched for hours. The soldiers waited under the scorching sun, rifles trembling in their hands. Some cursed, others prayed. But the Apaches never advanced. They simply stood, proud and silent, watching. Monroe felt the weight of every life pressing on his conscience. If he ordered fire, hundreds would die, and for what? A barren valley, a line in a report, a name carved into history. He saw his men as they truly were, not conquerors but sons, fathers, and brothers who didn't know why they fought anymore. Then came the moment no one expected. As the wind rose and the dust swirled, Monroe gave the only order his heart could bear. Lay down your arms. His voice was steady, though it carried the tremor of a man defying his own world. The sergeant looked at him in disbelief. But Monroe repeated it, louder this time, until it echoed against the red cliffs. Slowly, rifles began to drop. 800 soldiers lowered their weapons, one by one, the clatter of metal mixing with the cry of the wind. The Apaches watched, their faces unreadable. Naiche dismounted and walked toward Monroe. The two men met in the open valley, where death had been expected but mercy arrived instead. Monroe extended his hand. Naiche hesitated, then took it. In that simple gesture, centuries of hatred seemed to pause. Around them, the soldiers stood in stunned silence, and the Apaches lowered their bows. There was no treaty signed, no victory declared, only the shared recognition of humanity. The valley, once meant to be a battlefield, became a sanctuary of peace for a fleeting, eternal moment. When the army reported the event, Washington called it cowardice. Monroe was stripped of his command, branded a disgrace. Yet among those who were there, none ever spoke of shame. Years later, veterans of Red Valley would tell their children of the day they saw something greater than war, when 800 men chose compassion over conquest. And in the mountains, Apache elders told their young ones of the white captain who listened to his heart instead of his orders. Time washed over Red Valley like rain on stone. The grass returned, the rivers whispered again, and the story lived on in both tongues. Some called it surrender, others called it salvation. Monroe spent the rest of his life in quiet exile, far from the noise of politics and guns. But he carried peace in his heart, knowing that for once, in the long shadow of history, humanity had triumphed over hatred. And when he died, an old man under a pale desert sky, they say a group of riders appeared on the horizon, descendants of those 200 Apaches who once faced him. They came not to mourn a soldier, but to honor a man who had remembered that courage isn't always found in battle, but in mercy. In the stillness of Red Valley, where blood was never spilled that day, the wind carried their chant, soft and eternal, a hymn to the power of compassion, and to the day when 800 soldiers laid down their guns, not in defeat, but in grace.